website. Thanks for having me here today to the Iowa FTA convention. We haven't had to do this much this year because most of them have been canceled, so we decided to come out to this one. We usually get to talk, and so it's nice to get together. Before I get started, is there any, what is the main question you want me to answer today? Anybody? I'm sure I'm probably going to cover whatever it is. Anybody have anything they want to?
Trapping prices.
Trapping prices. Well, that's what I'm going to cover, so you'll be happy. Well, I don't know if you'll be happy, but I'm going to cover them anyway. As you know, last year, obviously, the fur business ran into as many possible problems as it could possibly run into. I mean, if you look at the COVID problem, the major areas early, when it was still winter and they were still selling coats, was Italy, Korea, and China. And if there's three important markets for the fur business, it's Italy, Korea, and most importantly, China. And that was obviously the hardest hit area. And what it did was they were actually having kind of a decent retail season in China. And December 26th, I believe it was, when they January 26th, I think it was, when everything started getting locked down there. And that was it for the retail fur business. So any business, although the Chinese New Year was already over by then, and the gifts for Chinese New Year would have been finished, but still, there's probably 20-25% of the season that had that's not going to happen because of the lockdown. So then we had about a quarter of the season not happen last year, and not only in China, but of course the rest of the world then soon followed, and retail shut down everywhere, and even in China. You think, oh yeah, they can't sell coats, but they couldn't even make them. The factories all shut down as well. So all the workers went home. So even if a guy was thinking about preparing for the next year, he couldn't even manufacture coats. So we were at a situation where it was very, very difficult to sell anything. And then on top of that, the Chinese government started, talking about imposing restrictions on even bringing skins, anything that was raw into the country. So not only, was there nobody buying, but it was going to be illegal to even bring skins into the country. And we had actually, at the time, we had actual containers of fur on the water waiting to get into China. So, it's going to get there, and there's, it's illegal to bring it in. Well, the containers on the water, the problem sort of ironed itself out, and they've kind of allowed some skins in. And actually, just in the last couple weeks, there's been some new restrictions imposed. I think Canada's got some tighter restrictions on what they can bring into China, and right now they can only bring in raccoon and mink. We can bring in still all of the items, but the customs is so difficult. All of our skins are they have a COVID test done on them, and if you get a COVID test positive, and not all COVID tests are perfectly accurate. I'm sure you guys maybe realize that. And even if they're 95% accurate, if you're that 5% doesn't get an accurate one, and they burn your skins at the dock, it's not a very lucrative business. So, anything that we ship over there is subject to seizure if for some reason there would be some type of positive COVID test, or if the Chinese laws on importation change. And Chinese laws aren't like the United States laws. I mean, they impose a law, and then they don't really say what it is. And then the local officials, where it's being imported, they sort of interpret it. And then over the next course of a couple months, you start to figure out, hey, yeah, we can import this. Yeah, we can't import this. If you get something confiscated, or if you get something turned around on the dock and it's got to come back to the United States, that's kind of how you find out. So there's a lot of risk right now for us on anything we export. So what's happened in China is, as I said, the business absolutely stopped in, January, all the way till, say, March or April. And then typically early in China is when they start to prepare for the Russian season. And the Russian border is just absolutely closed with China. So the April, May, June business that you do with raccoon, which is a really important item around here, was, just finished. So there was no business for us to do in April, May, June, because that's when they make their earlier orders for the export to Russia. And then in June, July, August, and even into September and October is when they start to make for the Chinese market. People come in. We have shops in come in, they buy 10 skins, they buy 20 skins, they buy 100 skins, they make samples, and then the retailers come and buy those garments that are made out of those samples. And if they start to sell a little bit, they start to reorder, and that's how we sell our stuff over there now. Well, that business, compared to last year, so we lost all of the Russian business, and that bit, the early Chinese business compared to a year ago, I would say, is somewhere around half. And I would say that we're covering the market as far as our company in China more than we did last year, and our business is still half. We have skins available in every major market in China more than we ever have. I mean, if you're a manufacturer in China and you want a wild American skin, you can come to one of our places and you don't have to travel at all because we're there. So, I don't know what that means for the entire industry, but certainly the business is off somewhere around half in China. And if we look to the ranch mink, I would say it's a little easier to gauge. I think 40 million skins were sold last year at auction, and I think so far this year until last week when Copenhagen started, 6 million skins had been sold. So 40 to 6 is probably about 4 million are going to be sold. So about 25% of the ranch mink skins have been sold to China from here as opposed to last year. So if you extrapolate that, to the wild fur business, I'm sure the numbers are probably fairly similar. Okay, so we know the business is going to be less. I mean, we could, conceivably get a good retail season. You can't hear me?
They can't hear you.
Oh, they can't hear me. What if I talk a little bit closer like
That's
that? Sorry. So what if we get a good retail season? Has anybody seen pictures of what's going on in China as far as daily life right now? Anybody seeing the news at all? I mean, daily life in China is relatively the same as it was a year ago. I mean, people are out. My customer texted me last night from Beijing, and he said, I'm in Beijing, and, he said it's just, restaurants are packed. Everything's packed because there is absolutely no virus there whatsoever. So they, as long as they don't go in and out of the country, there's no way to get the virus in. So life is kind of returned to normal. So, we could get a relatively good retail season. Problem is, we're not going to know that until, into, almost January. Because, their Chinese New Year, where they buy a lot of coats for, that's later than Christmas. So it's a little later season. So we won't know so much of that. But right now, we're preparing, for somewhere around 25 to 50% of the business that we did last year in China. And what does that mean for prices? Well, on every item, that means something a little bit different. Like, you can start with muskrats. I know you guys don't have a lot of muskrats around here anymore, but the muskrat market is pretty. There's very few muskrats laying in China, and I would say we would probably have prices similar to last year. Maybe a tick cheaper because ranch mink have come down just that much further. I mean, ranch mink are so cheap right now. It is just unbelievable. I mean, you can buy a brown female, a size 1 or so, for single digits, under $10. I mean, it's just very, very cheap. But anyway, the muskrat, because quantities are very limited in the world market, very few coming in from Kazakhstan, very few coming in from Russia, and very few available in the United States. The prices, will be relatively stable to last year. We've sold muskrats, just a couple weeks ago. We've sold muskrats really all summer long. The raccoon, which is what most of you guys are here for, and what most of the people on Facebook are listening for, we are not selling at the absolute worst prices in China. In fact, the prices are so that, nothing is a matter of price over there as far as whether you're going to sell it anymore. I mean, we're talking about, fur skins, mink, and raccoon, and, kind of everything except coyote. So, we're cheaper than conventional garments, what we're talking for price. So the problem that we have with raccoon is, even though you think maybe that not that many people trapped last year, there wasn't as big a production historically as there used to be. The quantities that are still available, that we still are able to purchase, are still just vastly more than what we're able to sell. Our inventories, even though when COVID hit in I think
when did we lock down here? Maybe the 15th of March or something like that. I know that we finished all of our routes in Iowa, but there was a lot of places we couldn't go, and even though we couldn't end up going to those places, our production for the year was still, like I said, it was still more than what we could sell, and there is, a few good signs as far as stock goes. I mean, Napa, their stock has been depleted, so their bankruptcy is just about finished, and there's no raccoon left up there. There is some raccoon in the countryside, in the hands of trappers, in the hands of dealers. We certainly have a quantity. Some of the Napa coon that were sold out last year from their stockpiles are sitting in China. And I would say some of them priced, that they can't really, even because they were purchased not that long ago, they're priced at a point they can't sell them, at least they can't sell them cheaper than I can sell them. So, but we are in a better supply situation than we were a year ago, even though us as a company, we bought more than we actually sold last year. So I think one thing that will happen is we will probably start buying fur a little later than we did last year. I think we ran our first routes around here in November. We probably won't start until maybe the 1st of December. Maybe come around, pick up some deer hides, whatever. But we'll push that back because it'll help us know a little bit more if they would have a bit of a decent retail season, and if they're starting to replace goods, the trapper would be able to benefit, from that. And we could pay a little bit more for those raccoons. So, but the problem is now is quantities are still, there are still quantities available at very, very cheap prices because, dealers that may not even be in the business anymore, call us up and they want to sell raccoons, very, very cheaply. And as far as price goes, I mean, in March, I think or maybe February, the last time I came through here buying, I mean, we were just getting bad COVID news. We hadn't shut down here yet, but we were getting just horrible COVID news, while we were buying. I remember, as a matter of fact, my last time I ran this route, I had a customer call me up in the morning. I had run Friday up by Farley, and then I run Saturday back this way on 64, starting in Central City. And, he called me up and he said, it is over, and, that's a horrible feeling, when he's your main customer and he calls you up and he's like, I don't know if we'll buy anything this year, if there's going to be any business, and you got to still buy from trappers. You got, trappers lined up at the truck, waiting to meet you. So, the price was at the end of the season last year was horrible, but we were in a situation where we didn't even know if we could export the skins to China. We're still in a little bit of a situation like that, but we do have other avenues. We can go into other countries and dress them because those import restrictions are typically only based on raw skins and not dressed skins. So we can circumvent that now if we have to. But I hate to tell really prices right now because we do have, probably if today is the 1st of August or 1st of September, we have all of September, October, November, and 3.5 months really before we're going to be buying big numbers of raccoon. And I hate to tell a price that's too cheap, and then nobody traps coon, and they come to the truck in December and say, gosh, these prices are pretty good, and I would have trapped a lot more if I'd have known that. So I guess we are a little bit maybe slightly optimistic about prices, and in saying that, we're cheap right now. I mean, we're buying some raccoon from trappers that weren't able to sell it during the season, and it is a very cheap price. But we are a little bit optimistic coming into the season this year. If the Chinese, if everything is sort of normal there, and they go into a winter, maybe there's a little bit of pent up demand. Maybe they'll buy some garments. So I guess that's what we're hoping for, and maybe there'll be a little Russian business in that too. Any questions on that? That's kind of the thing you're here to. So there should be a market, for raccoon. I would say at one point last year there literally was no market for raccoon, and I've never seen that in my lifetime. And I've been buying since I was 14 years old. So that's something that's that's never happened, and we all had to go through it, and it was a lot of sleepless nights from my end. Some guys here, I'm sure, are coyote trappers. The coyote market, it cannot not be affected by what happened. And the coyotes will probably be around 20% cheaper than last year. Orders were cut by the major, trim people that are making the parkas, in Italy, in China, everywhere. But the market is still relatively stable. It's just there's a little more inventory. There's inventory in China, and whenever there's inventory, there's going to be price pressure. Somebody's going to want to try and sell cheap. So I would still, target, certainly target coyotes if you have them in your area and you're able to get them. Per hour spent, it'll probably be your best item. Some of the other items. One positive note: we're going to be buying a possum this year for the first year in 10 years. And if you get a nice opossum, you probably don't even have to scrape it. We'll buy it in the grease. Probably only give you $1 or something, but it'll pay gas money. So that is a positive news. We're starting to sell a few opossum, and actually on the better opossum, I'm sold out for the first time in years. So, somebody say, what's that? Okay, beaver is an interesting item, and the last few years I've encouraged at groups like this, hey, beaver is something that you can sell to casters for a lot of money. You can go get $10, for a straight run of beaver. But the problem with beaver is as we talked a little earlier in my talk about how there's maybe less trapping pressure, there's less quantity being produced, although we can still find some old or stale goods. The beaver is an item because it's a nuisance animal. The quantities just don't drop, and it's both nuisance and caster has hurt the beaver market because people just continue to trap them. And last summer we had a record number of beaver in our inventory, and we're a little off of that right now, but we still just have infinite amounts of beaver. And even though we use quite a few, we have some special processes that we do that nobody else does on the hatters, and they're in demand. But we just cannot even try, and we can buy beaver. I mean, Fur Harvesters has a sale this weekend. I think they have another 90,000 beaver today. And you think for the amount of work the beaver is, the amount of trapping pressure there was this year, that many would not have just appeared. So I would say that beaver compared to last year will probably be the item that's kind of down the most. Actually, yeah, I would. If you're trapping them, and you can still get. Because really at the beginning of last year, we were paying actually kind of decent money for beaver. So if you look at that, actual year over year, if you look at raccoon, we were maybe a little aggressive early season on raccoon. But if you certainly look at last season, at the end, we won't be any cheaper than that on raccoon. If anything, we'll be a bit higher. It did get very cheap at the end. So yeah, the beaver is. It never sort of stops coming. I mean, you take all the warm water states, where they just trap them all winter long. Where Arkansas, they just appear. I mean, those guys trap a lot of beaver, and they still pull the casters out. They might not be good, but they get close to $80 or something for the casters. They can kill a lot of beavers. So red fox also will be maybe a little stronger than last year. Last year, at the beginning of the season, if someone brought me a red fox, you almost didn't want to buy it. It was you just would put it in inventory. It was almost like buying an opossum. And now the red fox are being used for liners in China, and I would certainly pay more than I did last year. So there are a couple of items that would be better than last year, and raccoon would be similar to the end of last year, maybe even a little better than the end of last year. I guess the most important thing is that we hope for a fairly cold winter in China, and we hope that that the retail season will just be kind of normal there, and that we can consume some quantities, because if they can just consume some quantities, the raccoon business in a year or maybe even less, maybe 6 months, maybe the tail end of next season could be kind of decent. The other thing I touched briefly on was the ranch mink, and so if there was 40 million sold last year and there's a few at auction, if there's a few less this year because more ranchers have gotten out of the business, maybe say there's 33 million and only 10 million have been sold. that is the one bad thing that we have coming from the ranch mink again is, they're only going to get half the mink sold. There's going to be 25 million mink from this year on to next year. And, that's going to keep those cheap another year. On the flip side of that, it does look like an immense amount of ranchers are finally going to exit the business. So we should at some point have just, an industry where we don't have this constant thing over our head of all of these ranch mink selling for such ridiculously cheap prices, because that is the thing that is just ultimately killing us. It's very difficult to sell a coon, for $14 if somebody's selling a ranch mink for $6. It makes it very difficult, and that situation has been very sticky on the way down. The ranchers have not exited the business. They had $100 mink in their rearview mirror, and they just thought, hey, if I hold out, I'll have that again. And they made fortunes, just 7 or 8 years ago. So they didn't want to exit the business. But it's just getting to be a long enough period when a typical rancher in America is going to average $17 this year, maybe $16 on males and females, and his cost is going to be $31, $33, $34, $35. So $15, $18, $19, $20 loss. Again, it can go pretty quick. What about questions? Anybody have any questions here?
There's a Facebook
We got
question.
some. Go ahead.
Do you have any business in the United States that buys from you, big customer of yours?
There is very little business in this country. If we didn't have China, there's absolutely no reason I would be here today. Yeah, we definitely need China. We need trade with China in this country. I'll tell you that. Without it, forget it for the farmers. Forget it for a lot of the problems that we have in the fur business is a direct result of the trade problems. We would have had last year. We would have had a lot more raccoons sold if it hadn't been for the trade problems. We were having trouble getting raccoon in last year.
Because Russia wasn't able to trade for anything.
In Russia,
Are they normally a pretty good buyer?
they're not the business they used to be, especially direct from us.
Yeah.
They buy a lot of their stuff through China, finished garments. They go in there. So that's the business that was really hurt last year. They ended up getting COVID pretty bad. It was a little bit late. May, June, July is when they sort of had their hardest period. But that's when they're usually buying the garments from the Chinese. Anybody else? We got a couple Facebook questions. What do you got?
They're wondering about Bobcat, Fisher, and will you be coming south?
Bobcat, and there is Bobcat season here now, will be, similar to last year's numbers. I would say from $30 on the central, the top end is definitely going to be cheaper than last year. The western heavy cats will be cheaper. The centrals will be very similar. They weren't that high last year, and a good set of central cats were $30, $35. That'll be very similar. Fisher market is very tough, very difficult. We can sell them, but it's another item where it's very, very cheap what we can sell them. And what was the last one? Are we going south? Yeah, we'll definitely be going south this year. Yeah.
They also mentioned when you turn that way, they can't hear you.
Oh, when they turn that way.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll talk a little bit more. How about you guys? Any more questions?
How cheap them southern beaver gonna be then? You say way cheaper, how much cheaper than?
Yeah, the southern beaver. We got a guy that goes down south trapping beaver. That's a great question. These guys, I'm sure, all want to hear that on Facebook.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah. I would say last year at this time, we were paying, $8, $9 on a straight run of big southerns, because a lot of times they're a little bigger than a run of northerns. And so you pay almost the same price, even though they're not as good of a beaver, just because the size is better. And I hate to say this, but it would be $4 or $5 today. That's just how it is. I mean, as this beaver market has gotten cheaper, there's no decrease in the quantity whatsoever. And in fact, in some ways we've seen a little bit of an increase. There's areas where like say in the like the temperate regions of this country are big for trapping, because up here, if you guys get a 0-degree day, you might be done. You go to Missouri, you go to Arkansas, that doesn't happen. So those guys just keep going. Well, if you take a guy down in Arkansas and he's a trapper, what item can you get any money for? There's really no muskrats there anymore. The raccoon, if you guys are getting $5 for a raccoon, he's getting a dollar or two, okay? Or maybe he can't even sell them in Arkansas. So a coyote is still pretty much worthless in Arkansas for a lot of the state. So what he says to himself is, hey, I'm going to trap beaver because I want to trap. I want to sell something. He can sell the casters, and maybe he can sell the carcasses, and he can sell the fur for $8, $9. So actually, maybe some of the areas the beaver production has gone up instead of.
The otter then as a byproduct of that.
I tell you, the otter market is another item where I can sell it in China, but you just can't sell many, and it's going to be, I'd say a top of $15. I mean, and that, like I said, that's today. But I mean, we bought otters this summer for quantities, very very cheaply, and the Chinese know what you're paying, and they want to. So yeah, the beaver otter thing is going to be more difficult than it was for sure. So, I mean, coyote is certainly the best item. I would say muskrat would be second, and maybe raccoon third. I like the chances of a raccoon better than say than a beaver. I would say right now, which is different than I've said for the last 4 years when I'm over here. I'm always trying to convince guys here to trap beaver because we can use them. But. All right, any other questions? Anything? Now's your chance. You got me on the spot.
Caster, you said you mumbled 80.
I don't know. I know that was kind of the top of what it got last year, maybe even a little higher. But as far as I know, there was a little trouble getting caster out of the country at the end of the last season too. So it kind of dropped for a little bit, but then after that kind of got sorted out, it kind of got back up to those levels again. So, caster prices, could be similar to, to last year. Probably be a few less beaver caught when people start to hear, $4 or $5 on them. So that could actually be a little bit beneficial to the caster market. Okay. Anything else? All right. Otherwise, you're certainly welcome to give us a call over at the factory. One of us will be around to talk to you. And, kind of pay attention to our Facebook page or to our website because, in 3.5 months, you can't imagine what can change in this industry. 3 weeks ago, I wouldn't have bought an opossum. Today I'm telling you guys to trap a few opossum and, we'll buy them. So things can change daily, weekly, and, check out our website. So if there is an item that's good in October, when you're starting to think about trapping, that you don't miss it. So anyway, thanks for having me, and always appreciate it, and we'll see you next year.
Thank you for